My ex-husband sat on my couch and announced, "I've decided to give you another chance at being my wife." He was standing at my door at midnight on a Tuesday with all his belongings, like the last 2 years hadn't happened, and our 3 kids hadn't spent months in therapy dealing with him abandoning them for his 24-year-old coworker. "Robert, what are you doing here?" He pushed past me into the house he'd left without warning. "Ashley dumped me for someone younger. Can you believe that? After everything I gave up for her, she found someone with more money. So I'm back. Where's my spot in the garage?" He was serious about moving back in like nothing had happened. "Your spot? You haven't lived here for 2 years. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago." He laughed and sat on the couch. "That divorce was a mistake. We both know that. You were emotional and I was confused. Ashley manipulated me, but now I see clearly. This is where I belong." He put his feet up on the coffee table with his shoes still on. "The kids need their father. You need a husband. The house needs a man. It's perfect timing." The kids were finally sleeping through the night without crying for him. "You left us for Ashley. Served me papers on our daughter's birthday. Told the kids you were getting them a better mommy." Robert waved his hand dismissively. "I was going through something. Midlife crisis. Every man has one. You should be understanding." He walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. "Good you still buy my beer. I knew you were waiting for me." I hadn't been waiting. My boyfriend Daniel drank the same brand. "Robert, you can't stay here. This isn't your home anymore." He laughed while drinking the beer. "Of course it is. I paid the mortgage for 15 years. My name might not be on the deed anymore, but this is spiritually my house." Spiritually, he had sold his house to pay for Ashley's apartment deposit. "You gave me the house in exchange for no alimony, remember? You said I'd need it since no one would want a single mother of 3. Robert nodded. "Right, and see? You're still single. Because you were waiting for me to come back. Your loyalty is touching." I was not single and had not been waiting. "I'm seeing someone. Daniel. He's been wonderful with the kids." Robert spit out his beer. "You're dating? That's adultery. I'm still your husband in the eyes of God." "You traumatized the kids. Kendall won't even say your name. Josh had panic attacks. Lily failed 3rd grade from stress." Robert shrugged. "Kids are resilient. They'll forget all that once Daddy's home making pancakes again." He'd never made pancakes. That was my thing he was remembering. "Robert, you need to leave. You can see the kids during your scheduled visitation." He laughed loud enough to wake them. "Visitation? I'm their father, not a visitor. I'm moving back into my bedroom. You can sleep in the guest room until you adjust to having me back." Our former bedroom, where Daniel and I slept now. "That's my room, with my boyfriend, who lives here." Robert's face went red. "You let another man live in my house? Sleep in my bed? Play with my children?" Everything was his despite abandoning it. "Daniel pays half the bills, helps with homework, shows up to recitals, everything you stopped doing." Robert kicked the wall. "That's my job. I'm the father. Some random guy doesn't get to replace me." "Where are you planning to work? Ashley got you fired, remember?" He'd been caught using the company credit card for her shopping sprees. "I'll get my job back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Or you can support me while I figure things out. Wives support husbands. Ex-wives didn't support ex-husbands. I'm not your wife. You made that very clear when you had Ashley pick out the kids' Christmas presents and sign them from Daddy's new family." Robert sat back down. "Look, I made mistakes, but Ashley's gone now. She ran off with her trainer who's 21. Can you imagine? She said I was too old at 42. The irony of him being dumped for someone younger was lost on him. "You were 38 when you left me for her. She was 22. Robert got defensive. "That was different. Men age better. Women peak at 25. Ashley betrayed me." The betrayal of leaving for someone younger and richer. "So you want to come back because you got dumped, not because you love us?" Robert looked offended. "Of course I love you. I've always loved you. Ashley was just adventure. Your stability, home, comfort. Every man needs both." He needed a backup plan. "The kids have stability with Daniel and me. They're happy. Finally happy." Robert stood up aggressive. Daniel. I'm sick of hearing about him. Call him now. Tell him to pack his things. The real man of the house is back." That's when Daniel walked in from his night shift. "Robert? What are you doing here?" Robert puffed up. "Taking my family back. You can leave now. Thanks for keeping my spot warm." Daniel looked at me confused. "Ashley left him. He thinks he lives here now." Daniel laughed and it made Robert furious. Robert's face went from red to purple in about 2 seconds. He lunged forward at Daniel with his fists already coming up and started yelling about how he deserved respect. And this was still his house and he had rights as the man who built this family. I jumped between them before Robert could actually throw a punch. My hands were shaking, but I made my voice as steady as I could and told Robert he had exactly 5 minutes to grab his stuff and get out before I called the police. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. My voice was shaking the whole time, but I kept talking and said I meant it, and the clock was ticking. Robert looked between me and Daniel like he was waiting for one of us to back down. Neither of us moved. Robert sat back down on the couch instead of leaving. He crossed his arms over his chest like a kid refusing to go to bed. He actually had the nerve to say I couldn't make him go anywhere because this was his home too, and he had just as much right to be here as anyone else. Daniel pulled his phone out of his pocket and started tapping the screen. Robert watched him with this smug look on his face like he thought we were just trying to scare him and wouldn't actually go through with calling the cops. The phone made the dialing sound, and Robert's expression changed a little, but he still didn't move. Daniel put the phone on speaker, and we all heard the operator answer asking what the emergency was. The police showed up in less than 10 minutes. I heard the sirens first and then saw the lights flashing through the front window. 2 officers came to the door and I let them in. Robert's whole attitude changed the second they walked into the living room. He jumped up from the couch and started talking fast about how I was his crazy ex-wife and I was keeping him away from his children and his own home. He said he just wanted to see his kids and I was being unreasonable and vindictive. One of the officers held up his hand to stop Robert from talking. The officer asked me if I had any documentation about the property. I ran to get the divorce decree from my bedroom and brought it back down. My hands were still shaking when I handed it to him. The officer read through it carefully while Robert kept trying to interrupt and explain his side. The officer looked up and told Robert the decree was very clear that he had no legal right to be in this house. Robert started yelling about how that was just a piece of paper, and this was still his family. The officer asked him to step outside. Robert refused and said he wasn't going anywhere. The second officer moved closer and told Robert he could walk out on his own, or they could escort him out in handcuffs. Robert finally stood up, but he was screaming the whole way to the door about custody lawyers and taking everything from me and how I'd regret this. I called the locksmith first thing the next morning. Daniel helped me go through the house and make a list of every door that needed new locks. We were finishing up the last one on the back door when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Kendall came down in her pajamas with her hair messy from sleep. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and stared at us working on the lock. Her hands started shaking and she asked why Daddy's car was in the driveway last night. Her voice was so small and scared. I put down the screwdriver and went over to her, but she backed up against the wall. She asked if Daddy was moving back in and if we had to leave. I realized she'd heard everything last night, even though I thought all 3 kids were asleep through the whole thing. I knelt down and told her Daddy wasn't moving back, and this was still our home and nobody was making us leave. She didn't look like she believed me. Josh came into the kitchen during breakfast, and Lily was already eating her cereal. Lily looked up and said she saw Daddy through her bedroom window last night. Josh's face went white. He started breathing really fast and his chest was going up and down too quick. I got up and went to him, but he was already hyperventilating. I pulled him into my lap, even though he's getting too big for that, and held him tight while he gasped for air. He was crying and saying Daddy was going to make us leave our home and we'd have to go live somewhere else. I kept telling him that wasn't true, but he couldn't hear me through the panic. Kendall's door stayed closed upstairs, and when I went up to check on her later, she wouldn't answer when I knocked. Lily followed me around the kitchen, asking if Ashley was coming to be their new mommy now, and if they'd have to call her mom. I felt like everything we'd accomplished in therapy over the past year just got wiped out in one night. I found Aurelia Powell's number in my phone contacts from the divorce. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I explained what happened with Robert showing up and the police having to remove him. She made a concerned sound and asked if I could come in that afternoon. I said yes immediately, and she told me to bring any documentation I had about the incident. Her office was downtown in one of those old brick buildings with the creaky elevator. Aurelia met me in the waiting room herself instead of having her assistant do it. We went back to her office and she closed the door. She sat across from me and listened while I told her everything about Robert trying to move back in and refusing to leave. She took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she explained that while what Robert did last night was definitely trespassing, I needed a formal restraining order to actually prevent him from coming back. She said the process would take at least 2 weeks to get a court hearing. 2 weeks felt like forever when I thought about Robert showing up again. My phone rang the next day while I was at work. The caller ID showed the kids' school. The secretary's voice was high and panicked when I answered. She said Robert was there trying to take the kids for ice cream and he wasn't on the approved pickup list, and what should she do? I told her to keep the kids inside and not let Robert near them, and I was leaving work right now. I grabbed my purse and ran out without even explaining to my boss. The drive to the school normally took 15 minutes, but I made it in 10. Robert's car was still in the parking lot when I pulled in. I could see him through the glass doors of the main entrance talking to the secretary at the front desk. Kendall's classroom was right down that hallway. I parked and practically ran inside. Daniel came home from his shift that evening and found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. The kids were upstairs in their rooms being too quiet. He sat down across from me and reached for my hand. He said he needed to tell me something and I wasn't going to like it. My stomach dropped. He said he loved me and he loved the kids, but he never signed up to deal with my ex camping out on our doorstep and harassing us. He said he wasn't leaving, but he needed me to handle this legally and quickly because the stress was affecting his work and our relationship. I realized I could lose him if I didn't fix this fast. He looked exhausted and I knew Robert was doing this to both of us. I went back to Aurelia's office 2 days later to work on the restraining order application. Her paralegal was there this time. His name was Liam and he had the same last name, so I figured they were related somehow. Liam helped me organize everything we needed for the application. We took photos of the belongings Robert had tried to move into the house. We got a copy of the police report from the trespassing incident. We got a statement from the school secretary about Robert showing up during pickup time. Liam was going through Robert's social media to see if there was anything useful there. He stopped scrolling and turned his laptop screen toward me. Robert had been posting about coming home to his family and how his wife was being difficult about reconciliation. He made it sound like I was the one causing problems, and he was just a devoted father trying to reunite with his children. Every post painted him as the victim and me as the villain, keeping him from his family. Robert's mother called me 3 days after the school incident. I saw her name on the caller ID and almost didn't answer. She was crying before I even said hello. She begged me to give her son another chance and said he was sleeping in his car and had nowhere to go. She said I was being cruel after all the years they welcomed me into their family. I reminded her that Robert chose to leave us and chose Ashley over his children and signed divorce papers giving up his rights to this house. She said everyone makes mistakes and Robert was sorry and couldn't. I find it in my heart to forgive him. I told her I wasn't responsible for fixing the consequences of his decisions now that Ashley dumped him. She kept crying and saying I was heartless, but I hung up anyway. The school counselor called me the next morning while I was getting ready for work. She needed to meet with me as soon as possible about all 3 kids. I dropped everything and drove to the school 20 minutes later. She sat across from me in her small office with folders for Kendall, Josh, and Lily spread across her desk. Kendall was having nightmares again after 2 months of sleeping through the night. Josh got into a fight with another student yesterday over something small, and the teacher said he seemed angry all the time now. Lily's math grade dropped from a B to a D in just 2 weeks, and she wasn't turning in homework anymore. The counselor pulled out drawings Kendall made in art class that showed a dark figure standing outside a house with scared stick figures inside. She said Robert's return had destroyed months of progress, and the kids needed clear boundaries more than they needed their father right now. I sat there looking at Kendall's drawings and felt sick knowing one night of Robert's chaos had broken everything we built. 3 days later, I pulled into my driveway after work and saw Robert sitting on my front porch with 2 suitcases next to him. My neighbor from across the street was walking her dog, and Robert called out to her about his wife locking him out over a small disagreement. She looked uncomfortable and hurried past. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway because he was working late. I got out of my car and walked toward the porch. Robert stood up and smiled like I should be happy to see him. He said he just needed a shower and a hot meal and asked why I was being so heartless. He moved toward the door like he was going to push past me again. I stepped in front of the door and put my hand on the knob behind my back. He said he'd been sleeping in his car for 3 days and his back hurt and couldn't I just let him clean up. I told him no. He said I was being cruel, and he was still the father of my children. I stayed in the doorway blocking his path. Robert tried to step around me and I moved with him. He got frustrated and said he made his choice 2 years ago, but things were different now. I reminded him that he served me divorce papers on Kendall's birthday and told the kids they were getting a better mommy. He had the nerve to say that was Ashley's influence and he never meant those things. I looked right at him and said he told Josh directly to his face the day he moved out that he was finally free from the burden of being a father. Robert's face went red and he said I was twisting his words. I said Josh still has nightmares about hearing his daddy say he was a burden. Robert stepped back and said I was poisoning the kids against him. I stayed in the doorway and told him he did that himself when he chose Ashley over his family. He said Ashley manipulated him and he was confused. I said he was 42 years old and responsible for his own choices. He tried one more time to push past me, and I threatened to call the police again. Robert finally backed off the porch but started shouting loud enough for everyone on the block to hear. He yelled that I was keeping his children from him and turning them against their father. He said I was vindictive and cruel, and he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. He got in his car and slammed the door hard enough that I heard something crack. He sat there for a minute staring at me through the windshield. Then he drove away fast enough to leave tire marks on the street. I stood on the porch shaking and trying to catch my breath. My neighbor Catalina came over from next door a few minutes later. She asked if I was okay and said she heard everything. She offered to testify about his harassment if I needed her for any legal stuff. She said she'd been watching him show up and bother me and she wanted to help however she could. I thanked her and felt less alone knowing someone else saw what was happening. The restraining order hearing happened 2 weeks after Robert first showed up at my door. I sat next to Aurelia in the courtroom waiting for our case to be called. Robert walked in wearing a suit I'd never seen before that looked too big on him. He sat on the other side of the room and kept looking over at me like I was the one causing problems. The judge called our case and we all stood up. Robert told the judge I was vindictive and preventing him from having a relationship with his children. He said he made mistakes, but he was trying to fix things, and I was being unreasonable. Aurelia stood up and presented all our paperwork. She had the police report from the trespassing incident. She had statements from the school counselor about the kids' trauma and regression. She had photos of Robert's belongings he tried to move into my house. She had screenshots of his social media posts painting himself as the victim. The judge looked through everything while Robert kept interrupting to say it was all lies. The judge told him to be quiet or leave the courtroom. Aurelia explained how Robert abandoned us 2 years ago and only came back because his girlfriend dumped him. She showed the divorce decree where Robert gave up the house and agreed to scheduled visits. The judge asked Robert if he'd been following the visitation schedule. Robert said he didn't need a schedule to see his own kids. The judge granted a 6-month restraining order requiring Robert to stay at least 500 feet from me, the house, and the kids' school. 2 days after the hearing, I was at work when flowers arrived at my desk. The card said he still loved me and knew I'd forgive him eventually. My hands shook holding the card because Robert wasn't supposed to contact me at all. I called Aurelia right away, and she said to bring her the flowers and card immediately. I left work early and drove to her office. She took photos of everything and filed a violation report that afternoon. The police arrested Robert that evening at his mother's house where he'd been staying. He spent 3 days in jail before his mother bailed him out. Aurelia told me later that his mother took out a loan she couldn't afford to get him out. Daniel came home from work that night and found me crying at the kitchen table. The kids were upstairs doing homework. He asked what was wrong, and I told him about the flowers and Robert getting arrested. He sat down and was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was tired of the constant drama and felt like Robert would always be hanging over our relationship. He said he loved me, but this was affecting his work and his sleep, and he didn't know how much more he could take. I broke down crying harder and said I was doing everything I could legally, but I couldn't control Robert's delusions. Daniel's face changed and he reached across the table for my hand. He said he wasn't going anywhere and he was sorry for making it sound like he might leave. He said he just needed me to hear how hard this was for him too. We sat there holding hands while I cried and he kept saying it was okay. Kendall's therapist called me a week later. She said Kendall finally opened up about seeing Robert again. Kendall told her therapist she didn't want to see her father anymore because he scared her and she didn't trust him. The therapist said Kendall was very clear about her feelings and seemed relieved to say them out loud. Josh's therapist called the next day with similar news. Josh said his dad made him feel bad about himself and he was happier when his dad wasn't around. Lily told her therapist she couldn't remember much good about her dad and she liked Daniel better. I sat in my car after the third call and realized my children had already made their choice about Robert. No court order or visitation schedule would change how they felt. They were old enough to know who made them feel safe and who didn't. Saturday morning, someone knocked on my door and I looked through the window to see Robert's mother standing there. I almost didn't open it, but she called through the door that she needed to apologize. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked older than I remembered, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She said she needed to say sorry for enabling Robert's behavior. She told me she found out Robert had been lying to her about wanting to get back together with me. He'd actually been dating someone new already and just needed a place to stay after Ashley kicked him out. She said she felt ashamed for pressuring me to take him back without knowing the truth. She'd believed his version of events where I was the villain keeping him from his family. Now she knew he'd been manipulating her the same way he manipulated everyone else. I asked her why she was telling me this now. She said she couldn't keep pretending her son was the victim when he kept hurting everyone who tried to help him. She said she loved her grandchildren, but understood if they didn't want to see her anymore after she took Robert's side. I told her the kids could still see her if they wanted to, but it would be their choice. She nodded and left without asking to come inside. Aurelia helped me file papers to change the custody agreement 2 weeks later. We requested that Robert have no visits unless he completed parenting classes first. He also had to keep stable housing and a job for 6 months straight. Most importantly, the kids had to agree to see him after working with their therapist to prepare. The hearing was scheduled for a month later. Robert didn't show up to contest anything we filed. The judge looked at the empty chair where Robert should have been sitting. She reviewed all our documents and the statements from the kids' therapists. She asked me if the children had expressed their feelings clearly. I said yes, and all 3 of them felt the same way. The judge granted everything we asked for without any changes. She said the children's well-being came first, and Robert had shown no evidence he was ready to be a stable parent. I walked out of the courthouse with Aurelia and felt like I could finally breathe. 3 weeks passed without any word from Robert. The kids stopped jumping at every car door that slammed outside. Kendall started sleeping with her door open again instead of locked. Josh made it through an entire week without asking if Daddy was coming back. I thought maybe Robert had finally accepted reality and moved on with his life. Then my phone buzzed during lunch at work. Unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open the message. It was Robert. His new girlfriend kicked him out and he needed me to know he made mistakes. But he was still the father of my children, and I couldn't erase him from their lives. The message went on for 3 paragraphs about how everyone abandoned him, and I was the only one who understood him, and the kids needed their real father. I read it twice, trying to feel something other than tired. No anger came, no sadness either. Just this quiet relief that I didn't have to respond anymore. I took a screenshot and sent it to Aurelia with a note asking if we needed to document it. She replied within minutes telling me to block his number immediately. I did. The blocked confirmation screen felt like closing a door I should have locked years ago. Daniel came home that Thursday with this weird smile on his face. He told the kids to pack bags for the weekend because we were going somewhere special. Kendall asked where, and he just said it was a surprise near the ocean. The kids ran upstairs screaming about the beach while I stood there confused because Daniel had never mentioned any beach house before. He explained his parents owned a small place on the coast that they rarely used, and he thought we needed to get away from everything for a few days. I hugged him right there in the kitchen because he somehow knew exactly what we needed without me having to ask. The drive took 3 hours, and the kids sang along to the radio the entire way. No one mentioned Robert. No one looked nervous or scared. When we pulled up to the beach house, I saw this tiny blue cottage with white shutters sitting right on the sand. The kids bolted out of the car before I even turned off the engine. They ran straight to the water, and I watched them splash in the waves like they were normal children who hadn't spent the last 2 months dealing with their father's chaos. Daniel grabbed my hand, and we walked down to join them. Kendall spent Saturday afternoon building sandcastles with Daniel. She kept asking him to help her make the towers taller, and he showed her how to pack the sand tight so it wouldn't fall apart. Josh collected shells along the shoreline without looking over his shoulder every few minutes. He found this perfect spiral one and ran back to show me with actual excitement in his eyes instead of anxiety. Lily played in the shallow water until she got tired and climbed into my lap while the sun started setting. She fell asleep against my chest with her hair still damp and sandy. I sat there holding her and watching Kendall and Josh laugh with Daniel, and felt this weight lift off my shoulders that I didn't even know I was carrying. We were going to be okay. Not because Robert was gone or because the court said he couldn't contact us. We were going to be okay because we had each other and we finally had peace. The school counselor called 6 weeks after the judge modified the custody agreement. She said she needed to give me an update on the kids' progress. All 3 of them were back to their previous levels before Robert showed up again. Kendall was sleeping through the night and participating in class discussions. Josh's grades went back up and he was playing with friends at recess again. Lily stopped having meltdowns over homework and her teacher said she seemed happy. The counselor told me the clear boundaries and Robert's absence gave them permission to feel safe again. Kids needed to know the adults in their lives would protect them even when it was hard. I thanked her and hung up feeling like maybe I hadn't failed them completely. Protecting them from their own father felt harsh when I was doing it, but hearing that they were healing made it worth every hard decision. 2 months went by without any contact from Robert. Daniel and I were cooking dinner together on a random Tuesday when he stopped chopping vegetables and looked at me with this serious expression. He said he wanted to officially adopt the kids if I was open to the idea. They were already his children in every way that actually mattered, and he wanted to make it legal, so they would know he wasn't going anywhere. Before I could even respond, the kids came running into the kitchen because they heard what he said. They started cheering and jumping around like Daniel just told them we were going to Disney World. Kendall hugged him so tight I thought she might crack his ribs. She whispered something in his ear and he got tears in his eyes. Later he told me she said he was the real daddy because he stayed. Josh and Lily were hanging off his arms asking when it would be official, and if they could change their last names. I stood there watching my family celebrate and knew this was exactly what we were supposed to be. Not the family Robert tried to force us back into. This one. The one we built together after everything fell apart. The one that chose each other every single day.